The first fire, the oldest human story on Earth. San, oral tradition, human origins, the Great Migration. What counts as knowledge and why it matters. A complete study in story, science, and the politics of knowledge. Part 1, the story, the first fire told in full. Part 2, who the San are, genetics, fossils, and the archaeological record. Part 3, the Great Migration, how one people became all people. Part 4, what the story is actually encoding, science and narrative together. Part 5, whose knowledge counts, the argument. Part 6, 3 knowledge systems compared. Part 7, the closing, the fire is still burning. References, peer-reviewed sources. Part 1, the story, the first fire told in full. Before the story begins, understand where it comes from. The first Homo sapiens emerged in Africa approximately 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. The oldest known fossils come from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, dated to around 300,000 years ago, and from sites across eastern and southern Africa. These were fully human people, thinking, social, cooperative, and capable of culture. The San people, also known as the Ko-San, of southern Africa carry some of the earliest diverging genetic lineages of any living people on Earth. Their ancestry branches off very close to the base of the human family tree. They are not the first humans, no living population is, but they are one of the oldest surviving branches of the human story still present in the world today. Their bones have been found in the ground. At Classy's River mouth in South Africa, fossils of anatomically modern humans have been dated to between 120,000 and 60,000 years ago. At Hofmeyr, a skull 36,000 years old was recovered, and its features matched southern African populations more closely than any other living group. At Border Cave, a child was buried with care 74,000 years ago. Every human alive today descends from early African ancestors. This story is not separate from you. You are downstream from it. In the beginning there was no separation. Humans and animals shared the same world without fear between them. They moved through the same silence and understood each other without words. A deer could look at a human and see a relative. A bird's movement carried meaning a person could read like language. Nothing needed to be explained because everything was already known. Above all of this, woven into every living thing, present in every stone, river, and creature, was Kang. Kang was not a god sitting in a distant sky. Kang was the intelligence inside nature itself, the awareness behind consequence, the force that held everything in balance. Kang moved through the world in 1,000 forms, a praying mantis in the grass, a snake crossing stone, a shift in the wind before rain. Not disguise, presence, and the world Kang had made was whole. The warning fire existed, but not yet in human hands. At Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, evidence of fire has been found dating back over 1 million years. It lived in lightning, in the deep heat beneath the earth. It was ancient and powerful, and its full meaning was not yet understood. Kang knew fire would come to human hands eventually, and so Kang gave a warning, not as a threat, not as a law, but as a truth the world already knew. If you bring fire into the world above, the world will change in ways you cannot undo. Fire will give you warmth and light and power over your food, but the animals will see what you have become, and they will not recognize you anymore. Fear does not need understanding. It only needs a reason to run. This was not a punishment. It was a consequence. A punishment can be forgiven. A consequence simply is. The night of fire. The night was cold. The darkness was deep, and fire was there. No one remembers who struck it first. Perhaps it was one moment of cold and hunger that pushed a hand forward before the mind could stop it. Perhaps it seemed like a small thing, just one flame, just for this one night. The flame rose. Light spilled into the dark in a way the world had never seen. Warmth moved through the cold. The humans gathered close and felt, for the first time, that they had power over the night, and across the darkness, the animals watched. They saw light that moved without a sun behind it. They felt heat their bodies had no memory to explain. They had no name for what they were seeing, so they ran. The separation. It did not happen all at once. First, the smaller animals stepped back from the firelight. Then the larger ones disappeared into the trees. Birds lifted from branches where they had always rested near humans and flew into the dark until they were gone. The animals did not leave because they hated humans. They left because they no longer recognized them. Before fire, humans were part of the same world the animals knew. After fire, humans smelled like burning and carried destruction that could consume in seconds what had taken years to grow. The animals did not see neighbors anymore. They saw something to flee. And the humans stood in the warmth of their fire and felt the world they had always known pull back from them. They could not name what they were losing, but they felt it leaving. This was not only story, this was ecology. Fire altered habitats, changed animal behavior, and modified landscapes across the ancient world. The rupture the sand described in narrative is the same. Rupture the fossil and archaeological record reflects in fact. Kang speaks again. Kang saw all of this, not with anger, not with punishment. Kang spoke again, but this time the words could not restore what was lost. They could only name it. They developed compound adhesives and heat-treated blades. They became people who interpreted, remembered, and created meaning, because direct connection had changed, and knowledge now had to be made by hand and passed by voice. The New World. The world divided, not into good and evil, not into right and wrong, but into connected and separated, into the world before fire and the world that came after. Humans now had to hunt instead of simply live alongside. They had to track instead of simply know. Every sign in nature had to be read because it could no longer be felt directly. And this is where story was born. When you can no longer simply know, you must remember. When you must remember across time, you must tell. And when you tell, the words must carry weight, because the people who come after you will need to understand what you learned, even though they were not there to feel it themselves. Roughly 70,000 years ago, small groups of these same people began walking out of Africa. They moved into the Middle East, Asia, Europe, the Americas, across the Pacific. Over tens of thousands of years, their skin changed color with the sun. Their features shifted with climate and diet. Their languages separated. Their cultures grew apart. What we call race today is nothing more than the result of distance, time, and sunlight acting on people who all came from the same place. They all came from here. The Sand People carried this story through all of it, through every generation, through drought and movement and survival. The way of fire is carried through the dark, carefully, with both hands, so it does not go out. Part 2. Who were the first humans? What the first Homo sapiens looked like, how they lived, and how they compared to Neanderthals. What did they look like? The first members of our species, Homo sapiens, appeared in Africa roughly 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. The oldest widely accepted fossils come from Jebel Irhoud, dated to about 300,000 years ago, along with additional early remains from eastern and southern Africa. These were not primitive beings. They were fully human, thinking, social, cooperative, and capable of culture. If you stood next to one, you would recognize them as a person, and they would recognize you the same way. Face. Flatter than earlier species like Homo erectus. Stronger bone structure than most modern humans. Less defined chin. Skull. Brain size similar to modern humans. 1,350 cc. Longer and lower shape. Less rounded than today's more globular skull. Brow ridge. More pronounced than in most people today, though far less extreme than earlier human species. Body. Lean. Physically capable. Built for endurance and long-distance movement. Well adapted to African environments. Human evolution was gradual. There was no single moment when humans suddenly appeared. Early populations overlapped, mixed, and evolved over time. What were they capable of? By the Middle Stone Age, early humans were already demonstrating advanced behavior. Symbolic engravings at Blombos Cave, 75,000 years ago. Shell bead jewelry for social identity and communication. Heat-treated stone tools at Pinnacle Point, 164,000 years ago. Complex adhesives and multi-step tool construction. Long-distance movement and coordinated planning. Intentional burials, Border Cave, 74,000 years ago. These are not basic survival behaviors. These are signs of planning, communication, and meaning-making. Who were the Neanderthals? Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis, lived in Europe and Western Asia from about 400,000 to 40,000 years ago. They were not primitive or inferior, just a different branch of the human family. Body: shorter, stockier, and extremely strong, built and adapted for cold climates. Skull: brain size equal to or slightly larger than ours, approximately 1,400 cc. Long and low skull shape with a large nose adapted for warming cold air and a forward-projecting face. Side-by-side comparison. Category: Homo sapiens Neanderthals. Brain size: 1,350 cc, 1,400 cc. Thinking style: flexible, adaptive, intelligent, more specialized. Language: complex, likely present, less complex. Symbolism: extensive, limited but present. Body: tall, lean, short, powerful movement, long distance travel, more localized DNA in living humans, found in all humans, 1 to 2% in non-Africans. Outcome: survived globally, extinct 40,000 years ago. Why did Homo sapiens survive? Adaptability: humans could adjust quickly to new environments, diets, and conditions. Communication: more complex language enabled knowledge sharing and coordination across groups. Social networks: humans built large connected communities, not just small isolated groups. Symbolic thinking: stories, identity, and shared meaning allowed large-scale cooperation. Climate change: environmental shifts disrupted and fragmented Neanderthal populations. Interbreeding: Neanderthals were partly absorbed. If you have non-African ancestry, you likely carry 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. They are still here, just not as a separate species. What made humans different was not strength. It was the ability to create shared meaning, stories, language, identity, memory. That ability spread us across every continent on Earth and built every civilization, every culture, every science. Everything we are began in Africa. Every human alive today shares that origin, and the people closest to those early roots, genetically and geographically, are still here, not as relics, but as part of the same ongoing human story. Part 3. Who the San are: genetics, fossils, and the archaeological record. The San are among the oldest continuous human populations, with genetic lineages tracing deep into early human history. The genetic evidence. In 2009, geneticist Sarah Tishkoff and her team analyzed 121 African populations and confirmed that San populations carry some of the earliest diverging genetic lineages of any living people on Earth. Their DNA branches off very close to the base of the human family tree, before most other populations diverged. The Hadza and Sandawe peoples of Tanzania also carry deep ancient lineages. Africa as a whole holds the greatest human genetic diversity on Earth because humanity originated there and has had the longest time to diversify. A study by Schlebusch et al. Confirmed population continuity in southern Africa stretching back more than 100,000 years. The people living there today are directly connected to the people who lived there at the dawn of modern human existence. The fossil record. Classy's Rivermouth, South Africa. Fossils of anatomically modern humans dated to 120,000 to 60,000 years ago. Among the oldest confirmed Homo sapiens remains on Earth. Hofmeyr skull, South Africa. A 36,000-year-old skull whose features matched modern southern African populations more closely than any other living group. Border Cave, KwaZulu-Natal. Human remains and an intentional child burial dated to approximately 74,000 years ago. Blombos Cave, South Africa. Ochre engravings and shell beads dated to 75,000 years ago. Among the oldest known symbolic behavior anywhere on Earth. Pinnacle Point, South Africa. Heat-treated stone tools dated to 164,000 years ago. Wonderwork Cave, South Africa. Evidence of fire use over 1 million years ago. Part 4. The Great Migration. How one people became all people. Approximately 70,000 years ago, small groups of modern humans began migrating out of Africa. This is the Out of Africa migration, and it is the foundation of every human population that exists anywhere on Earth today. This is not debated. It is supported by mitochondrial DNA, Y chromosome studies, whole genome sequencing, and the fossil record across multiple continents. As migrating populations moved into new environments, they adapted over thousands of generations. Skin tone changed in response to UV exposure. Facial features shifted with climate and diet. Languages diverged. Cultures separated. What we call race today is the result of tens of thousands of years of environmental adaptation by populations that all started in the same place. Race is not a deep biological reality. It is distance in time and sunlight acting on the same original people. All humans share 99.9% of their DNA. The genetic difference between any two people on Earth is smaller than the difference between two chimpanzees from the same forest. The San are one of the oldest surviving branches of the tree that eventually produced every human population alive today. Not above anyone, not below anyone, but closer to the beginning of the shared human story than most. Part 5. What the story is actually encoding. Read outside the framework of myth. The first fire narrative encodes principles that align with what modern science now understands about early human impact on natural systems. Ecological disruption through technology. Fire altered habitats, changed prey behavior, and modified landscapes. The story encodes this as relational rupture, which is exactly what it was, ecologically. Unintended consequences. A central principle of systems ecology is that interventions in complex systems produce nonlinear, unpredictable outcomes. Kang's warning is a direct articulation of this principle, thousands of years before it appeared in scientific literature. The cost of separation from the natural world. As humans became more technologically capable, their direct interdependence with local ecosystems changed. San tradition marks this not as progress, but as rupture, a loss of relational knowledge that once made survival intuitive. The origin of storytelling as knowledge preservation. Once direct connection is lost, knowledge must be preserved through memory, story, and repetition. The narrative explains why oral tradition exists and why it matters. It is the bridge that remains after direct experience changes. Part 6. Whose knowledge counts? The argument. If written traditions from 3,000 to 4,000 years ago are treated as foundational history, why are oral traditions, potentially far older, treated as secondary or symbolic? This is not a question about replacing science. It is a question about who gets to be taken seriously. The Big Bang Theory was proposed in 1927. No human witnessed it. We infer it from background radiation, redshift data, and mathematical modeling. It is powerful and well supported, but it is still an interpretation of indirect evidence. The Genesis narrative shaped Western law, education, and institutions for over 1,000 years with no physical evidence behind it at all. The San oral tradition comes from a people whose presence in southern Africa is confirmed by fossils, genetic analysis, and archaeological finds going back over 100,000 years. It encodes ecological principles that modern environmental science is only now formally articulating. It has been preserved and tested across more generations than any written text on Earth. So why is it in the mythology section? The honest answer is not about evidence. It is about history. The academic institutions that classified human knowledge systems were built during European colonialism. a period in which the intellectual production of non-European peoples was systematically excluded from formal archives and labeled primitive. Indigenous oral traditions were not evaluated on their merits. They were dismissed on the basis of who produced them. The sand story was not placed in the mythology section because it failed a test. It was placed there because the people who held the test did not consider its authors worthy of a passing grade. The strongest version of this argument, the one that holds up academically, is this: Indigenous oral traditions should not be treated as primitive myths, but as long-term knowledge systems that preserve ecological, social, and philosophical understanding developed over deep human history. Part 7. 3 Knowledge Systems Compared. These 3 systems are not competing. They are answering different questions. The problem is not that science exists. The problem is that only one type of knowledge has been treated as universally valid. System examples, backed by strong for explaining. Scientific origin models, out of Africa theory, Big Bang theory, fossils, DNA, radiometric dating, physics, astronomy, how humans evolved, when populations split, where humans moved, indigenous oral traditions, San traditions, Kaang, first fire, long-term cultural continuity, ecological accuracy, deep time survival of the tradition, how humans relate to the world, why behavior matters, what consequences look like, written religious traditions, Eridu, Genesis, Enuma Elish, physical tablets, archaeological context, recorded language, early civilizations, social structure, organized belief systems. You are not arguing that oral tradition replaces science. You are arguing that there are multiple valid ways humans have understood reality, and some have been ignored because of history, not evidence. If knowledge is judged by its ability to survive, guide behavior, and explain human experience, why are written systems automatically treated as more authoritative than oral ones? Part 8. The closing. The fire is still burning. The fire is still burning. Not just the one that was lit that first night, but the one carried forward in memory, in story, in the way humans still search for meaning in a world we changed. The people who carried this story, the sand of southern Africa, in lands now called Namibia, Botswana, and South Africa, are not separate from you. They are part of the same human story. Science tells us this clearly. All humans come from one origin, from early populations of Homo sapiens who lived in Africa long ago. Through what scientists call the out-of-Africa theory, people moved, adapted, changed, and became the many faces of humanity you see today. But no matter how far we traveled, no matter how much we changed, we never left the root. The sand are one of the oldest branches still standing, not above you, not below you, but closer to the beginning of the human story than most. And that means something, because the story you just heard, the story of Cain, the story of fire, the story of separation, is not just their story. It is a human story, a story about the moment we stopped living fully within the world and began changing it, a story about power and consequence and the distance that can grow between us and the life around us. And today, we are still living inside that moment. We build, we burn, we change the earth in ways we don't fully understand. And just like that first night, the world responds. The final question. If all humans come from the same beginning, if every culture, every people, every story traces back to the same origin, then why do we treat some human stories as truth and others as myth? And more importantly, what happens if the stories we dismissed were trying to teach us something we are only now beginning to understand? The sand did not just survive the beginning of the world, they remembered it. And now, so do you.